welcome to our Dream to Rise Inner Circle. And I'm so happy, really happy that I was able to convince my guest, who is my son, Gabriel. And professionally, he's a chef. And as a hobbyist, he enjoys anything that allows him to explore the outdoors, whether that's climbing or trail running, and is fascinated by different cultures and how that allows him to better understand the surrounding world. And he is truly happy that he is here with us. And because I've been inviting him several times to be our guest, and you've met also my daughter Natalia, so now you've met my children. So without further ado, I would just like to introduce to you my son, Gabriel Concordia. Hello, Gab.
Hello,
Thank
everyone.
you. Hello, Gab.
Right.
So, okay, would you like to uh, tell something first before I ask you a question?
Oh, you
It's
feel
going
free.
to be a question and answer thing, but if you want to ask questions, please feel free. Okay?
No, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, and Gab, you're also free to ask questions. Okay, can you share your story, why you have decided to move to Fresno, California? And what was the main reason behind you leaving the family in Virginia and decided to live on your own? Because
Oh,
it's also scary to move to a place without any support.
okay, yeah. So I'll answer the first question. So the main reason I moved to Fresno, California was for a job. So I currently work for a company called Brigaid. Brigaid is a company that puts chefs into different types of institutions, mostly K-12. So public schools. But we've worked in a variety of different institutions, senior living centers, incarceration facilities. So pretty much the mission of the company is putting chefs into these spaces to help. I guess the overall mission is everyone deserves to eat thoughtfully and well prepared meals and food, and who knows how to better operate in a kitchen than a chef. So I joined this company. Fresno, California doesn't seem like the most exciting place to live, and it's not incredibly exciting, in all honesty. But that being said, I've always been driven by a mission for my work. So, as my mother mentioned in the introductions earlier, yeah, I used to live actually pretty close to where Susan lives now in New Hampshire, but I used to live in southern Vermont. So I worked for an agritourism startup down there. And prior to that, I also worked for agricultural and conservation nonprofits. And even in restaurants, that was a lot more mission driven as well, whether if you want to call that farm to table. And I got my bachelor's degree in food studies, so studying the relationship between food and the human experience. So I've always kind of explored that realm and where food intersects with the human experience, mostly in agriculture as well as sociology and so on and so forth. That being said, there was a great opportunity. I was done in Vermont. I was working for a startup. Seemed like my time there had come to an end, and I was looking for a new opportunity. And I knew about this company because the founder of it was a well-known chef in the culinary world. And I applied, and I got a position here. So I decided to move out. So that was the main reason that brought me to Fresno. Um, in regards to why I decided to leave family, I think it's for me, it was growing up in Northern Virginia. It was the East Coast in general. I think it's especially in Northern Virginia around DC, it's a lot about money and status. And that always just there's a lot to the world. A huge inspiration to my earlier in my career was Anthony Bourdain. So first job I ever had was working in a sports bar and grill, and then I read Anthony Bourdain's book. And if any of you know who Anthony Bourdain is, he is a chef but and traveler and writer, has a lot of traveling shows out there that revolve around food. But I digress. That being said, it was something to kind of just expand my horizons. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I could make money cooking. So I decided, I was like, okay, so I can make a living off of this and just travel. My goal was to travel. I remember in high school, I wanted to work on a cruise ship, but then I realized international waters, minimum wage isn't really a thing, as well as living quarters, right? So it's that dream was brought to a harsh stopped because of realities of it. But I think it was still being exposed to different cultures. I had the opportunity to go to what's considered arguably the best culinary school in the country, thanks to the sacrifices that my family made, especially my mother. But at this culinary school, it's called the Culinary Institute of America in New York, exposed to a lot of different perspectives and cultures. A lot of my cohort was people from not just around the United States, but from around the world. And doing so allowed me to build relationships and get even deeper perspective of the world that I have never even seen, which further pushed me to want to travel more so, right? So, and that kind of just snowballed. It snowballed into a lot of curiosity. I think when growing up, being first generation kind of immigrants, children here in the United States, it's hard to understand as a child what exactly, like, obviously there's a lot of different upbringings with my mom and my late father's upbringing, and my own upbringing, right? And so it was always difficult for me to understand their hesitance in letting me kind of go out and experience a traditional American childhood that most others experience in Northern Virginia. But now understanding the world a little bit better now, I completely understand. But because of that, I didn't get to experience as much as I wanted as a kid. So also being the youngest, it was like rebel and also just like I want to get away from all of this. But that also the double-edged sword of that is, and like the more positive edge sword of that is Blade, is that it made me extremely curious. I think it made me extremely curious to know what else was out there because I didn't really build like a strong network of friends in high school until probably my last year. And so what else is out there? What else can I experience in this life that I've missed out in my childhood? And so that kind of got me to explore. And what started as like just wanting to get away from home and family initially was evolved into understanding the world and the systems at play that make this world what it is and this society what it is, at least here in the United States, but also globally, and just getting to understand people more. I think also because of that shelteredness when I was a kid as well, it motivated me to build relationships when I could and not take friendships for granted because lack thereof growing up, right? So yeah, I think that was the main reason as to wanting to go away, even if it is at the cost of comfort, of stability and security and familiarity. It's interesting. I keep mentioning snowballs, but as it does snowball, I continue to understand how I would quickly develop and grow with a certain level of struggling, discomfort, a certain level of resilience was needed, right? So putting myself in a constant state of appropriate struggle, I would say, and a struggle so of my choosing, and what a privilege that is, to really develop myself and build characteristics about myself that I was extremely proud of. Said characteristics is empathy. And you only gain that through sympathy and empathy, right? Because sometimes I've not necessarily put into the same exact situation of the people that I've met in different locations. I've seen what they're going through. So I guess to a certain extent, it's still empathy. I get to see it with my own eyes. And as human beings, we're not geared for we're not geared for long distance, whether that's in the proximity of time or the physical proximity. We're not geared for like far away, distant issues, right? We believe what we see. And what better way to understand the struggles that, our nation, our communities, and our world faces than in person? And you have to put yourself into that position because there's so many benefits to social media. It's hard to discern sometimes the internet. And, I think for the same reason that my mother brought me here tonight is that some people don't have access to these kinds of platforms, whether it's this one or a larger platform. Having someone who comes from a completely different background and listen to their stories as well is significant because even in my current job, like I'm a chef, that's my title, but I would say cooking is probably 30% of my job. And I'd say the other 70% of my job is actually relationship building, because I have no authority over personnel. I'm actually a contractor consultant. So all the changes that we have to implement in my current job in our partnership is actually based on the relationships. And that's the same thing with any type of relationship, right? Like you can't make changes, you can't get people's buy-in, you can't get people to trust you unless you connect with them on some sort of level. The way that I connect to them isn't superficial, but genuine and sincere. So I guess connection for
Actually, that's what I've learned as I grow older. Now I've retired. It's not about money. It's not about status. It's not about the position. It's more about how are you able to build that connection? How are you able to build that meaningful relationship with each other? Because I think that's more important. I agree.
we still live in society, right? And money is still a thing. And I say all that in like from the most privileged position possible in reality, right? Like society, we are in a capitalist economy. And with that being said, this world runs on money, right? You can't talk about like this kind of privilege of money and status isn't as important as like building connections because that's such a privileged perspective and stance. Like, how are you going to talk about the lack of importance of money and privilege to people who can't feed their families, right? Majority of the kids here that I feed in Fresno, we make around 70,000 meals a day here in Fresno. And for a lot of those kids, it's their only meal of the day. So it comes down to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think that's something that I've learned in my career, working in restaurants and feeding a lot of the 1% high end clientele had me understanding like the way that I was approaching it before, and it was out of necessity for me because that was the only skill set that I had. It was a romanticized thing. Not to say that you can't make impact like that. In order to really make these changes, we have to approach it from a lot of different angles and being understanding of like, I think there are a lot of well-intentioned people out there, but I think having a pragmatic approach to it as well is extremely important in order to or else it's just this kind of conflicting dreamlands that people have. And then there's no middle ground because we still exist within society, right? So we want to make sure that we approach things pragmatically and not just have this romanticized approach to things, but also hear other people's approaches and somehow meet in the middle. Ideally, as time goes on, we continue to meet in the middle and continue to align and generations might see eye to eye a little bit better with each generation, right? But I think in the grand scheme of life, it's money and status isn't everything, but in the scheme of everyday life, it is extremely important, right? Because how can you talk about that if you can't feed yourself?
Of course. Gab, what challenges have you encountered during your move?
I didn't know anyone in Fresno when I moved here. It's moved here 2.5 years ago. I've always wanted to live on the West Coast. I think because of that whole money and status thing for me, it was a very big turnoff to the East Coast for the longest time. So West Coast seemed a lot more chillax. But the struggle is not having a community out here. My mom was lucky enough, like talk about 3 degrees of separation, but her coworker had a sister-in-law that lived here in Fresno that I was able to stay for the first couple of weeks that I moved here. So that was an instantaneous connection, but obviously a family, no one really my age. It was difficult to kind of like build those relationships. So for the longest time, it was just my closest friends here were my coworkers, which is great. They're fantastic. But I got away from restaurants so that way I didn't have to talk about food 24/7. You work at a certain level of restaurants and fine dining. You find yourself you you find yourself getting extremely tired of hearing yourself talk about food. So it became a thing as after restaurants that I wanted to build my skill sets in terms of creating relationships with people that who knew nothing about food, right? But the biggest struggles was like, okay, like I have my coworkers here, that's great, but I need to find different communities. And in the past, I've always found communities through some type of outdoor activity. I grew up playing soccer. When I lived in New York, I got into rock climbing and I was able to find different types of communities through those different sports. So I joined the climbing gym here, and the climbing gym here was a really ideal place for a climbing gym. So just an hour and a half north. If you drive an hour and a half north of Fresno, you are actually in Yosemite National Park, which is one of like Disneyland of climbing in the United States and the world. Um, and so it would attract a lot of climbers to the climbing gym in Fresno because it's the closest gym. But I could never seem to build any like close relationships with people in the climbing gym. It just wasn't the right fit for me. And I would play pickup soccer. Crew was cool and I got to make some friends there. But then, back to my mom's initial question of obstacles, I then tore my ACL. So I had to get operated on for a knee. I have a zombie knee now. Got tissue from a cadaver and built a new ACL for me. So that was pretty wild experience. But it was this taking for grantedness of my body that I've used so much for my jobs. Being a chef, it's physically demanding. And then afterwards, I was a farmer, also physically demanding. And then for the longest time was like trying to like figure out, okay, how do I live life without being able to use my body? But once I got, surgery and repaired my knee, it was a long year of PT and recovery. But then afterwards, it was also very depressing in a lot of ways because not being able to use my body and something that I relied on for so, I can't take this for granted. So I just started running. I was still scared for ACL injuries. For those of you who aren't aware, there's a lot of pressure on cutting motions. So quick change of what doesn't require quick change of direction. And I was like, running. You're in a straight line, typically flat ground on the streets. I can run. So I found one of my coworkers heard about a run club here in Fresno. So I joined that run club, and I didn't wasn't feeling as social at first because I had been here for a year and a half and I still felt like I didn't really relate to anyone in Fresno. And that was a huge contrast for me because someone who's extremely sociable and coming to a run club, I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna run and maybe I'll get more comfortable and meet someone. And it's funny, a buddy of mine, Brandon, is actually the first one to approach me. He stepped out of his comfort zone because he's usually not one to approach people, which was the irony was palpable. But I made friends with Brandon, and that gave me the confidence to be a little bit more sociable again. And again, snowballed from there and started meeting more and more people, found that comfort in getting to talk to people again because it's difficult. You've been at your home, you're not really socializing with people for a year and a half, whether that was from just not having a network here or from the injury. You have to go, you have to trying to find your legs again in term literally, but also figuratively. I think that was like the biggest thing that just made a shift in my head. It was great to use my body again, but it was also fulfilling in regards to the relationships that it made me. I think it goes back to the first question, which was there is benefit and struggle. And aside from my recovery, but and the lack of community, but also the struggle of running, right? A lot of the people went there for social reasons, but also just running is extremely difficult. Especially if you're trying to go fast or for long distances. It is a huge accomplishment to run a 5K, like 3 miles, right? That's a huge accomplishment. To run a half marathon, massive, even bigger accomplishment. A marathon, even bigger accomplishment. A mile, half a mile, still a huge accomplishment. Just to get out there, put yourself in a position of distress, struggle in that. And then when you're doing it side by side with people, going at the same pace and struggling to also breathe at the same time as you can hear each other struggling to breathe. You're like, awesome, we did that, we did that together. And it's a really cool kind of bonding experience, just a cool way to kind of experience discomfort and struggle with other people that's appropriate and comfortable. So that was the main obstacles that I was facing here. Just being able to find those types of community has been extremely beneficial. But that's my way of finding community, right, is through active sports. But I've also found community through food. I work in food, right? But I've held different positions in food. I used to work in marketing, event coordination. And so I went to actually a few months ago a workshop that was organized by graphic designers. Am I a graphic designer? No. But as a marketer, I thought it was fascinating, right? There's this people of creative outlet, and they were doing this thing called a tea and tell. So they met at a tea shop and then they were just showing each other portfolios, not necessarily a presentation, but just asking for feedback. What do you think? And or just like, oh, I'm proud to show it off. And I'm like, that's awesome. Let me go check it out. And I then became familiar with this community of graphic designers. But what an experience. Just a completely different perspective from, what I know as my trade. And completely different way of thinking about things. And it kind of just gets me thinking about also like the benefit of creating relationships with people from different industries and different trades, not just from a creative outlet, but also just exposing you to different ways of thinking as well, whether that's your trade or in your career, but also different cultures. Majority of the cultures that exist, the demographics here in Fresno are Mexican, Hmong. I had never met a Hmong person before moving to Fresno.
What is
Um,
among
Hmong is a cult is an ethnic group that is distributed a lot throughout Southeast Asia and Eastern Asia and China. But there is no Hmong country, but rather you'll find a lot of the different communities throughout that part of Asia. But like it's a cultural ethnic group.
Mhm.
Uh, Punjabi populations. I work a lot with these different cultural communities in my job as well. Like I work with lunch ladies, food service workers, however you know them as, just different approaches. And for me, building community, as much as important it is to build community with people my age, it's also building community at my job. I have a network of chefs that I work with, but most of the times I'm working solo in a region of 13 schools. So at these 13 schools, I have to get to know the staff, build relationships with them. That is another sense of community for me, right? Something that I sought out for so long in terms of cultural perspectives and diversity. I was finding in these little schools rather than at a global scale. So that was another thing, trying to find community there as well. The approaches to building different communities was different everywhere I went.
Mhm. You mentioned about building communities, relationships. So how does social support from community influence mental health and resilience?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that family goes beyond bloodline. There's kinship, right? As much as my family in Virginia, my mom, my sister, they're obviously the biggest supporters of me and the biggest, family to me, but they live their own lives, right? My sister has her family now. She has kids. I have nieces now. And my mom, she said it herself before this call, was it took her a while to detach from me. And not only was that detachment necessary, but not only necessary to give me space, but also necessary for her to discover her own path and growth. That being said, for me, I go through this life alone, right? Nobody can. So you try to find people to lean on. And so for well-being, you find different members, different community members that fill different pockets in your heart, your soul, whatever you believe in, right? Because there is no one else other than my mother, but there are motherly figures that I have met in my life that bring me comfort because, you know, especially immigrant mothers, that the first question when I walk into their space, whether it's at school kitchen or if it's into their own home, the first question they ask me is, "Have you eaten?" And what a gesture of love and care that is to provide for someone, and friendships, right? But I think it's just like finding that comfort of, we have our own lived experiences, and a lot of those experiences are fulfilling but also create gaps, and it's finding ways to fill those gaps in our own lives. And a lot of that comes from trying to find relationships that might fill those gaps as well. I think that's what is great for me, in terms of how it affects my well-being. um there are people that here, like, that remind me of my childhood, but also people that I've never even, not necessarily culturally wise, but personality wise. Like my cook at my high school, she's Punjabi, and it's funny, I do the same thing for her because she was like, you're just like, you're almost like my son. That's what she calls me. And like some of the other like food service workers are like, oh, like your son is here. And she was like, where? And I was like, that's the chef. It's like a mother-son relationship in a way. I'm a similar age to her actual son. So they joke around with that. That brings a certain level of trust as well in terms of how I approach my job, but also how they approach me. They find a certain level of comfort. So I try to find that middle ground in terms of how I can make both parties comfortable. And that creates relationships. I think that just creates a level of fulfillment in terms of getting to know people beyond a superficial level,
Mhm.
you know.
And they
Yeah.
give you joy, peace, and fulfillment.
Each person in this world that I've met, I've been grateful. The people who have hurt me, the people who have loved me, the people who have given me, the people who have taken from me. I have no regrets in meeting any of those people. I have genuine appreciation for every single person that I've met because they have contributed to who I am today, as cliche as that may sound, right? Because, and I would not be here. I would not have this mindset. I would not have this perspective if I didn't meet those people
Mhm.
and have those experiences. So, yeah.
Well, any other questions or insights from the members?
I just want to thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you're letting yourself be adventurous and exploring things and being open to new cultures and letting yourself at this young age push yourself to new heights and comfort zones rather than waiting till you're like 50 like me to try to do that. But yeah, I truly appreciate you for sharing and I'm excited for all the new things you're going to learn.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and to that point also, like everyone starts somewhere, right? Like, yes, I might be comfortable in creating new relationships and, being extroverted and adventurous, whatnot. But there are things that I'm not the most comfortable with in life. Like, could I be a lot more financially literate? 100%. You know what I mean? But that being said, it's everyone starts somewhere. This life, it's a fascinating because we all start at different pages, if you will. And it's not necessarily a beginning to end. It's actually kind of just like where people start is just like this massive web, if you will. And you can travel that web however you see fit. It's like, okay, at this point in my life, I'm now going to explore this, right? It's interesting because, like, especially at my age, and I don't know if this applied to you all, at my current age, a lot of my friends are getting married. They're having kids, looking at buying homes. And I think about that and I'm like, gosh, I am not in that position at all. Um, but then there are people that are in the similar position as me and they're like, man, I can't believe like people are getting married like one after another. Like I have 3 weddings I'm going to this year. And like 2 of those I'm a groomsman for. And I feel like I'm so behind. But then I have those same conversations with people that have starting their families and their houses and they're like, man, I wish I could be doing the things that you're doing right now. I wish I still have that independence or enjoy your younger days because once you get married, you're not going to have that anymore, which there's truth behind it. But at the same time, there's also, it's almost like this yearning for a better time, if you will. And I think each time, each chapter or each, section, whatever metaphor you want to use for it, offers something different value. And I think there's different values and experience when you experience at different points in your life. So creating relationships and networks and friendships, kinship, whatever it is at my age right now of 29, or Debbie, I'm not sure how old you are, but at your age is a completely different experience, right? And I personally think that's incredible, right? Because my experience and the fact that we're on this call together and I'm able to share this experience with you, it's like, wow, how does that compare and contrast with my experience? Not necessarily for better or for worse, but rather it's like, wow, what a completely different experience that you, Debbie, got to live, right? What a pleasure like my life was. And ideally, we all get to the point where we can look back and be like, wow, there was no regrets in the life that I chose to live. And again, that's from a state of privilege, the way how I say that. We all have to start somewhere, but at the same time, it creates extremely meaningful experiences for different types of people and extremely beautiful people and just colorful conversations.
Mhm. Actually, it was late when I discovered my purpose as well. After I retired. That's why
Yeah.
I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And it gives me so much joy and meaning. So, and having this community, this inner circle is my family,
Yeah.
wherein we are free to share our stories. No one is judging you. We belong to each other. We accept each other. We respect each other. And most of the time, as I always share in the session, we are always focused on what we want. We are always focused on where we would like to go, our destination. Most of the time, we are fixed on our own mindset, and the insights being shared in this community opens our mind on how to view life, There are different ways on how we can view our lives. And here in this community, all supporting each other. That's what I love in this community. Any other question?
Cynthia,
I'm glad Sandy's here.
yeah, I'm so proud of our dear Gab, and he's so articulate. I'm so proud of you. But one thing, though, which really struck me during the discussion was the community, and you mentioned so many in Fresno, Punjabi, and Hmong, and for me, right now, I see it. I see it as a challenge as an immigrant. How do you build yourself? Because I'm pretty sure we came here in Virginia, we are all immigrants, and you have to be resilient to become the person that you are now, which I'm very proud of. And then of course you move beyond that. You're now an adult and you handle resilience in a much different way compared to when you were young, when you were probably bullied because other kids think they're superior to our. So my question for you is that just how did you take your resilience from being from your childhood, because you have to be resilient and strong, and then from there how did you progress to where you are now in in your community in Fresno?
Thank you. First of all, Tita Sandy, it's great to see you. That's a great question. I think it required a lot of reflection. Reflection is something that's highly overlooked due to human beings just inherently being egotistical creatures, right? We as humans are the center of our world. We are our own main characters, right? It's this thing of putting aside ego and trying to empathize with others, those bullies, this resilience. It comes down to understanding, why am I acting this way? Why am I experiencing this? Why is someone treating me like this? And I think when I've experienced my own share of traumas, my own share of negative experiences, and I don't know if it's a fine line. I don't know if I have that answer, but it's trying to find, I could have easily, because of those negative experiences, gone in a more negative way, right? I could have easily just projected all that hate that was thrust upon me onto the rest of the world and the people that I met. But I think a lot of it is teachings from my mom. And, I think I'm not the most religious person, but I think like a lot of the teachings from the church as well, treat people how you want to be treated. I think that's the golden rule. That was a kind of guiding light because nobody wants to feel like that, right? A lot of the traumas that I experienced as a kid as well, it was not something that it was like, I don't want to do this. I can be better than this, right? I saw it almost as a challenge. I don't want to bring that same pain to others because I brought that pain upon myself working in kitchens. I don't know if you guys have seen The Bear on Hulu or just seen anyone work in a kitchen. People who are attracted to working in kitchens are attracted to a certain level of abuse and a certain level of difficulties, adversity. And, there's a certain culture in the kitchens as well where physical and emotional abuse that I experienced as well. And then you kind of like go through my career was closely intertwined because of that, because of personal traumas and being attracted to kitchens. It's closely intertwined in terms of the lessons that I learned. Because of the lessons that I learned in my childhood, if I'm in a position of leadership in a kitchen, I don't want to be running things the same way either. It pushed me outside of kitchens. Like for me personally, I only like cooking if it's trying something new and cooking for friends and family. I don't like working in restaurants anymore because of the culture. It's these different cultures. I've taken these different lessons of, and also I've had to learn experiences for myself. There's people that I have, verbally and emotionally, hurt as well because of that kitchen culture. And I'm not proud of it, but I have to learn from those mistakes. And you don't learn from that. And going back to my initial answer, which is reflection and being genuinely and truly honest with yourself and not being afraid of your ego being hurt. That's why I brought up that first part was of ego, because if you are in constant protection of your ego, that just shows insecurity, right? And insecurity for me personally, was one of the biggest things that I struggled with. And so being able to truly, genuinely find value and provide value for myself, a lot of those things that I experienced as a kid, I felt that I didn't have value. I felt that I couldn't other than my work output. But then building relationships outside of and friendships outside of work, I learned that I was able to provide value in other ways. But I can only experience that through reflection as well, in terms of what else can I provide? And I can provide kindness and empathy towards others. And that got me through my insecurity. And, you know, if you believe that emotional intelligence can be increased, then that increased my emotional intelligence. Again, that's how I was able to overcome a lot of that.
Thank you so much. Right now, when you mentioned the kitchen and all the recipes, and for me, with the advent of AI, with AI around, you know, you can do a recipe, you just ask AI, hey, I have this items in my fridge. And
Yeah,
AI will give you something how to cook, what. Now,
sure.
that's a challenge for you guys, for someone with your job as, you know, chef or something. How do you face this?
Yeah. No, I love technical questions like this too. In terms of like recipes and AI, AI still makes a lot of mistakes. I actually used it for a project that I was working on for work recently, and I had to double check everything and I actually had to check everything. That being said, let's hypothetically move past all the mistakes it works on now, right? Let's say AI is perfected, it's able to provide you flawless recipes for things that you're able to provide. The direction that I see it going is just further disconnect from where our food comes from. I think I've also come to terms with, if this is the direction humanity brings itself in to, then that's the direction that humanity brings itself to, right? Like, there's civilizations have crumbled because of the choices that they have made, right? And so if that must be the case, then that must be the case. It is whatever entity you believe in, whether that's God, fate, whatever your faith you're following, like that is the direction it. I have to find comfort in that because I am only one person, and I trying to find my way in terms of how I navigate this career in this world. Um, but that being said, I'm still doing my part in what I truly believe in towards working a better future, and what in terms of a better future that I truly believe in, right? Is I does AI provide value? I think there is value in it. Does it need more regulation? 100% in my opinion. But with AI and like how it affects my job in terms of like, well, you know, AI will be able to do everything a chef does. There's a certain level of communication that is just missed out on from human to human than in AI, right? We can read things, you know, and there's character, and that is lost in AI. It's so homogenous. Like, so many people use AI or chat GPT to say, for example, clean up their resumes, right? And I've tried it, you know, and I like lined up 5 different versions of my resume, and it all pretty much looked like it was just chat GPT. And there's computers out there that can analyze whether or not it's AI, right? um there's a certain level of character and beauty that is taken out from like human constructed things, that I think, for me personally, I wish people would realize that sooner rather than later. But we are creatures of habit, and until we something like pushes us to learn from a mistake, um you know, we won't learn that. But that's okay. That's humans path. But like, yeah, I think it's just like I'm gonna do my part, and it's like, okay, like I'm gonna not use AI for this, and I'm gonna continue to read books and continue, because there's like, you know, there's like a few philosophers that had these incredible quotes, and I can't quote it directly, but the gist of it was, older generations, like, we are gonna study math and English, so that way our sons can study geography and culture, and then that way their sons can then study poetry and art, right? And it's because of these things that the evolution of humans is so that way we can continue to study things that are no longer essential, but just rather study and pursue the beauties of human experience, right? There's that line from Dead Poet Society, or I think it's Dead Poet Society, where it's like, it was like, you know, they're all noble pursuits, doctors, lawyers, surgeons, these are all noble pursuits, but art, music, this is what people live for, right? And so I think that same thing applies to the culinary arts, right? And food, because as much as I rip on restaurants nowadays, especially fine dining, there's a certain level of that AI will no longer be able to produce, right? Um, and yeah, I think it's like there's, I think people will learn, ideally will learn from it, but who knows? Um, that was again very disconnected and nonlinear answer to your question, but um, yeah, I think I don't know. I'm always gonna side on the human side of
Yes,
things,
true.
and I think there's always value in that people don't realize.
Thank you. Let's
Thank
just hope that everything will be still, because for me, being in a community, that's the most important thing. You have the support system. That's the reason probably why we have shooting in schools, and because the thing is the community is falling apart. That's how I see it. But of course, you can't don't quote me. That's how I see it as I watch TV. But anyway,
and
thank
yeah, I guess again, if anyone else has any questions, if there is any other questions, I would love to speak to that
Okay,
point.
Barbara. Yeah, Barbara.
Oh, Barbara has a question. Okay, cool.
Okay. Well, first, thank you. Your
Yeah,
presentation is really great. I like that you've taken all your experiences, positive and negative, and see the good in it.
yeah.
It's spiritual and it's grounded. It's really nice.
Thank you.
The question I have for you is, you mentioned Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
Would you ever like to do anything that he's done? I know he's done shows. He's traveled and featured different cultures and different foods and wrote books. Would you ever like to do that?
Yeah, I think I would love to. I think I would like to write a book one day. I've thought about starting my own YouTube channel as well. I've had a lot of different approaches to how I share what I've learned in the food world. And yeah, like a YouTube channel, a book is also one of those things. One of the reasons why I got into school food is because, like what better way to like influence how this country eats by helping create more food for the next generation. Um, so I've done a lot of different approaches, and yeah, I would love to maybe do that one day, but I think I'm a little bit more interested as well in terms of I think I personally seek more stability now, and the creative aspect of it is maybe not as stable. So, but maybe one day when I am able to have like, different sources of income and like stable like, insurance and whatnot, whatever the case may be, maybe I will approach those more creative aspects to share what I've learned with the world. But I think right now it's just like approaching it from a systemic aspect, um, because I think there's also a lot of things that I've learned that could also, if I was to share it in the wrong way, could be highly misinterpreted. And that's kind of like a huge downfall of social media, and just brain rot in general. But I think there is, I would love to, continue to see how people share messaging and whatnot. And also just finding the confidence to start my own projects is something that's still part of my journey. I haven't quite reached that level of confidence, but hopefully one day I do. But yeah.
Mhm. Thank
Um,
Thank
yeah,
you.
I do have a hard cut at 6, unfortunately. I'm extremely sorry.
Yes.
But
Okay. I think the question you'd like to answer.
yeah, just for Tita Sandy's question, in terms of lack of community, right? So I just wanted to kind of bring up little history. Uh, so there's a lot of theories out there in regards to our current lack of community, right? And like our food systems now, right? I remember during the pandemic, I was working for a farm, and like I actually worked for a foraging company, and I would go to a farmer's market, or like I did like a cooking class for a nonprofit that I volunteered for. And so I asked this kid, I was like, "Oh, do you know what this fruit is?" And they're like, "Yeah, that's an apple." And I was like, no, it's actually a pear. And you ask them like different fruits and they couldn't name it. And that to me was just like mind blowing, right? But you ask, and then I start to ask adults here in my current job, I'm like, can we label all the products in the walk-in? And, I had them write labels for the product. And these people are maybe in like their 40s, 50s, 30s. And there was a container of red cabbage in the walk-in, and it was labeled red onion. And I was like, oh my gosh, we can't even differentiate red onions from red cabbage. And to me, it's an interesting thing because it is a lack of connection from our food system. And that highly resulted from industrialization. So this is the history part of it. So the industrialization and kind of urbanization moved us away from, in pursuit of efficiency, moved us away from our agricultural sources of food, right? And then with the industrial age came refrigeration, which then further disconnected us even more because we didn't need to immediately use the products that we were growing out in fields, right? That caused urbanization. And while there was benefits to urbanization and industrialization, it is that thing that Tita Sandy mentioned, is the missing of community, because then we became a lot more self-reliant, become a lot more sufficient. But you look at cultures and say like Eastern Asia, where you have to collaborate along with a lot of different communities, because around surrounding villages as well, because if they didn't use their resources properly, it would affect your harvest in your community, and you would have to share resources as well. That being said, I'm not like giving the full picture, but there's a lot of community that was lost in the world of food, and that's how it impacted how we eat today. But then you kind of see little blips in history, like with wars, like in World War I, was the rise of victory gardens. People will start, because there was a shortage of food, and like the reliance of reliable stream of food, people will start growing food in their yards, right? And then that would be shared with their communities, which is like a fascinating thing, and that created more community between them in an age of urbanization and industrialization. And so you see little blips of it, and now in modern age as well, where people are trying to start community gardens more. And I always look at history through a lens of food, right? But you start to see people start build community gardens, community kitchens, dinner experiences, if you will, just sharing community. People are pursuing it. People still want it. But with rising, people are constantly, pursuing efficiency in this technological age of like growth, rapid growth, rapid growth, rapid growth. I think it's up to us, to every generation, to never lose sight of the importance of community and knowing our neighbors at beyond. We need to get to know everyone beyond a superficial level, even if that is just something as simple as breaking bread with them. And hopefully that's something that we never lose, and we pass on to our next generations whenever we have the opportunity to, and just even the smallest interactions.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I have to go.
Thank you so much, Gab, for doing this. It was a very wonderful session. Okay, I'll let you go now.
All right. Thank you, guys. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good night and see you next week.